Welcome to the Financial Freedom Podcast, where we interview remarkable people and share strategies for mastering money and living a meaningful life. With your host, Grant Sabatier, creator of Millennial Money and author of Financial Freedom, a proven path to all the money you will ever need.
Hey everyone, welcome to this special episode of the Financial Freedom Podcast. I'm going to mix it up a little bit. It's a dreary Monday here in upstate New York. I've now been under quarantine for almost, as of today, 2 months. So I came up here in late February. So 8 weeks in, and a lot's changing, a lot's happening. I know I've been doing some solo episodes, and in lieu of doing a solo episode this week, I wanted to invite a dear friend of mine, Leisa Peterson, who is the author of the forthcoming book, The Mindful Millionaire, on St. Martin's Press. You can go to mindfulmillionairebook.com to learn more about that. And I had the opportunity to read the book a couple of times and write the foreword. And I've gotten to know Leisa, over the past year or so, and didn't want to reflect on this time alone this week. Wanted to invite Leisa to the show. I always enjoy our conversations, and I'll bring her back on closer to when her book is released in July to dive deep on that and her money management philosophy. But wanted to welcome her to the show and have a conversation, and thought no matter where you're listening to this, just wanted to spend some time with you and see where this takes us and share where our hearts and thoughts are at. So Leisa, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Grant. I'm so happy to be here.
So this is the second time that we've tried to record this. We tried to do it last week, but ran into some technical issues. There's probably too much energy floating across the internet to record this. So I'm happy we're here. Can you share with the audience where you're at physically in this moment, and spiritually as well, now deep into this quarantine?
So I'm in Flagstaff, Arizona today, and we also live in Sedona, so I bounce back and forth, but it is so interesting. I was joking with my husband this weekend because, just like you, a month into the quarantine and keeping our distance from friends and family, physically speaking, just noticing the mind. I meditate a lot and I reflect and I look at what's going on from an inner perspective. And right now I would say there's a lot of really weird dreams happening and a lot of weird things, because it's like we've entered uncharted territory. That's how I feel about my life right now. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I certainly feel that as well. One of the things, I've been amazed at how many different feelings I've had during this period. And I feel like I've been pretty good over the past couple of years at intuiting or anticipating my energy levels and how I'm going to feel. And, I know that if I'm traveling a lot, I'm going to feel a certain way. And even though I remain kind of open to everything that comes, I feel like I have a rootedness in my life now that keeps me whole and keeps me sane. But these uncharted territories, I've gone from, when we first started this, from panic and uncertainty to then, 4 weeks in, kind of a settling into a new normal. And, now 8 weeks in, I've pretty much stopped reading the news. It's a little like Groundhog Day, but I literally and figuratively feel like I'm in a spring moment. The trees are starting to bloom. It's very verdant and very ripe. And just even maybe the past 3 or 4 days, I felt quite hopeful. And there's a fair amount of research I was reading around how people in war zones deal with trauma and recover from trauma. And a lot of what I have been reading came to this central point that our minds and our bodies naturally adapt to where even in what would be a really, really traumatic time based on the life that we've lived. We're very adaptive creatures. And I think I'm feeling that now, that even things that I didn't know could happen, are happening, which is fascinating for me from a sort of spiritual, emotional, physical development standpoint, because I think the conditions are constantly changing with each day. And it's almost like a very hyper intense moment of awakening, where when your normal everyday life has been so fractured and you can't leave, there's a lot of catching up to do, or just I'm very hopeful for what's going to come out of this from a creation standpoint, from a collective sort of spirit and consciousness raising standpoint. I think there's a leveling of the playing field that's happening here that I'm starting to feel hopeful about. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that you've become known for being someone who doesn't live in fear. And so I'm really intrigued and interested to hear how you're responding to this and what you're sharing, because a lot of people aren't responding the way that you're talking about. And I'm very tuned into both what you're saying and motivating my thoughts to look for the hope and all of the things that I think are good and can be turned around and changed and transformed in the world. And I also have one foot in paying attention to how people respond to fear. And I'm really sensitive to that too. It's like, it's great to hear someone like you talk about the potential or the hope. And I also feel like it's very important to think or consider, what it's like for people who haven't turned the corner yet. And I feel like I spend a lot of time thinking about that, not because I'm living in it, but because I know that there is an option, that we have choices available to us. And how does a person motivate themselves to go from feeling fear and anxiety and stress about, maybe their financial situation, and turning the tide so that they're not constrained by it? Does that resonate?
Yeah, absolutely. And, my response to that would be, I feel like being in this now for 2 months, I quarantined very early, that perhaps maybe I'm around a different corner now, just given the amount of time that I've been doing this. And I think that is what I'm like hopefully responding to, in this moment. And I don't think that fear is a bad thing either. I think that there's kind of irrational fear which haunts us, the fear that maybe we're not living the life that we want to, or that, we're not pursuing what we should be, or we're not taking care of others or taking care of ourselves. There's that almost ever present sort of anxiety within us as human beings. And then I think there's a more irrational, perhaps, level of fear that is rooted in kind of, am I the center of the universe? Am I what's going to happen to me after I die? What is this life? I think there's, and I'm not saying that's irrational. I'm just saying there's kind of that larger, I'd say maybe more existential type of a fear, which I used to suffer from immensely in my own life, just worrying whether it was about death or, what am I here for? And certainly we all have those feelings. And I don't want to use the phrase letting go of that, because that means it's like a conscious thing that you can do. But I think there's for me, I feel like I've just surrendered to it all. Meaning the only thing that I can control is to make sure I get up and take a walk, and that I'm eating good food, and that I'm getting rest, and that I'm connecting with the people that I love, and that I'm looking out for those that I love, and that I have a responsibility to share openly and honestly, with my readers and listeners and audience what I'm going through. And as long as those things are being done, the rest of it is, it's the rest of it. And I don't know, it's fascinating for me because, I was talking with my wife, and I've been complaining for the last year, since I got back from the book tour. I did over 80 events and 30 plus cities, and I wrote the book, and, was over 120 podcasts. And, it was just flying from city to city, driving from city to city. It was just mind boggling. And I've just been complaining for the past 6 months. Like, I just want to go to the country and rest and relax and do nothing. And, that's exactly what I've gotten. And obviously it's not on my own terms, but I'm saying all this to, it doesn't take away the fact that if you don't have enough money to pay your rent or buy food, or you're worried about your job or your career, but I think there's often changes in our life that perhaps need to happen, or will happen, and surrendering to those in some way is the only way to respond.
I've always wanted to ask you this question. I feel like this is the perfect time. Like, what do you do when you get a bit of like surprising news? I don't even know if I should call it bad news, but let's just keep it simple. Like, when you get news that you're like, that wasn't expected, I'm really curious. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, I think it's on the gradation of good to bad news. I've never been diagnosed with like a terminal illness, for example. I have had a number of friends die, a number of friends take their own lives. I've lost family members. For me, I think the answer to that question is very different over the past year than maybe previously. In the past year, I've really felt a fragility of being. Or, there's this Milan Kundera book called The Unbearable Lightness of Being. And I think that sums it up for me, in the sense that I certainly, if I get really bad news, I certainly cry more than I used to. I certainly feel more intensely. And I'm also able to take a deeper breath. And that's what meditation has really done for me, where, I usually sit for about 40 minutes, sometimes a little longer a day. And it's in those moments where I let whatever is welling up in me just fully well up. And so I cry, I get, intense body sensations, a lot happens. And so I respond to good and bad news quite similarly now. The hard thing for me is I feel the acceleration of time passing, and I'm more attuned to that. This is a new season. This is change. This is, everything is being and becoming and being reborn in every moment. Everything is always in transition. And I think the harder that I've tried to fight that or control that, the more anxiety and stress that I've felt in my life. And it doesn't mean that I'm like resigned or don't put up a fight or don't resist change. It's simply, I find that most things in life, they get more fluid, or they get easier over time.
It's beautiful to hear you describe that, and it brings so many things up for me. And I know you and I have different sort of backstories, but what I noticed in what you shared and in my own experience is that in the past, you referred to how you might have responded differently. Well, for me in the past, I had so much trauma that I was thinking to myself, as you shared, that I always just expected it to get worse, or that when one bad thing happened, like there was no understanding of what it meant to be living in this place of this lightness of being that you also referred to. And so I didn't have anything to compare it to. I just thought, well, bad news means bad news and it's just going to get worse. And I lived in that place for so much of my life. And so the contrast now is that I have such a clear idea of the way that I want to be living, and that I'm able to live that way with this sense of this lightness of being, that when news comes in, just like you said, feeling it intensely, allowing it to complete its cycle, knowing that it's temporary, and that the restoration of through the process that I know is coming is this settling back to this beautiful, joyful place that I am now home in. And without that comparison, for so many years, I didn't know I could even go there, right? But meditation and all this inner work for the past 20 years has shown me that there's a completely different standard that I can apply to life. And these things that are happening out there that do seem horrifying in the moment do not have to be my natural state of being anymore.
Yeah, I love that. I often, but sometimes I feel when I reflect back on who I was and how I responded to stress, I feel somewhat guilty now for that I don't feel that way anymore. You know, I've shared with my listeners in the book, you know, how there was just, you know, a moment a couple of years ago when I was writing the book and I was on the coast of England and Cornwall and woke up one morning and I was like, gosh, you know, what's this feeling that I have? I had never felt this feeling. And I realized it was the first time in my life that I truly felt at peace. And it just arrived. I wasn't meditating. I was having a cup of coffee in the morning and it was a beautiful day with a beautiful light. And, you know, I felt at peace. And I look back at, you know, pictures and things that I wrote even 2-3 years ago. And I was so stressed out. I mean, I was killing myself. I was burnt out. I was anxious. I was, you know, and I think we're in such a world where we're looking for the quick fix, and peace is hard won. It's really, really hard won. And I think, you know, I've been trying to write a little bit about this as I plan for the next book. You know, what is it? What are those moments of awakening that start you down a path of peace? You know, what is it? And I think there's often, whether it's in Buddhism or Taoism or, you know, any form of faith, there's always a level of reaching your kind of breaking point, or whether it's maybe you got a bad medical diagnosis or you're in a pandemic or you lost your job, or, you know, there's always some moment of turning and opening. But we live in such a prescriptive world where it's like, meditate 5 minutes and do this and be physically active. And, you know, all those things are certainly immensely helpful, but it requires, at least for me, just a pure surrender, just a pure, you know, like a massive out breath. And I feel so grateful that I've gotten here now. And and I know you know, I'm only 35. I have hopefully a lot of life more to experience, and I'm sure this will change and evolve. But the best way I can describe it is, it feels like with every meditation, with every moment when I truly try to either love or be kind or give or be fully alive and present, it's like more and more comes with each passing wave. And with each passing wave, they stay a little longer and something is left, you know? So now it's like, maybe there was no sand there, but because the wave keeps coming, now there's firm enough ground where I feel rooted enough that I'm not just going to float away. let's talk about lightness of being. It's like, how do you let go of everything that you are and have been without falling apart? And maybe we'll fall apart for a while, but for me, there's now enough sand there that, I don't feel like I'm going to be washed away. And, I feel so grateful for that. And that's now, I'm thinking very hard and writing around how can I even explain what happened to me? How can I share in a simple and prescriptive but loving enough terms? And that's loving, I think, is the key, or being kind. It's like, you can't just be like, meditate. It's like, even meditation books I read, they some are better than others, but they seem to miss this simple fact of, do the best you can. You're already enough. Like you it's already there. Like, you're already here. It already is. And that's my challenge. I had Chris Gillibo on the show last week, and that was my challenge, is like, personal development writ large has this fundamental undercurrent of, you're not already enough as you are. And so if we're always trying to improve, whether it's meditation, I think letting go of trying to get better and trying to improve and putting pressure on ourselves, and realizing that the same thing that made the trees outside made us, and that when we bite into an orange and it tastes really sweet and really good, like, that is a full expression of the energy of the universe. And for me now, it's like the universe is almost so alive in some cases, but I feel very called to figure out how to, just like in financial freedom, here are the 14 steps, and here's how you walk this path, trying to reverse engineer how I got to this moment from the very lost, stressful, hyper competitive, hyper individualized, sort of always on millennial that I was.
Yeah. The theme around proving and improving and kind of always doing more. I think when I was telling you that I was hosting a retreat yesterday, and a lot of folks had not done this sort of silent meditation. They were used to guided meditation, but not being able to sit in silence. And I think it's so fascinating, because what you're describing, this different way of being, is around being the witness and being able to pause for long enough to notice, rather than what I think we've been mostly trained to do in our culture, which is to criticize and to judge. So the opposite is pausing and just witnessing and allowing something to be what it is, without saying you're doing it wrong, or even that you're doing it right? Because there's a lot of pride is kind of not a very helpful, it's not a very awakened way of understanding. It's more about humility, that you actually, the more you know, the less you realize you know. And so you're like, wait, how does that work? It's this allowing and being with things without judging, which is just such a different way for most people. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Or what if you realize that you know everything because you are everything?
Yeah.
It's like a full, it's already in there somewhere. What do you fear?
What do I fear? My life over this past few years, I was reading the book that you and I are both, I think you're reading it for the first time, and I've been reading it several times, but I'm realizing that the past several years for me have been all about being in service of others. Like, there's not a lot that I want these days. What I do know I want is to use the things that I've learned and help others with them. And so I don't think I pay so much attention to my own fear as I do to collective fear. And what that means for me is, what of the things that I've learned about the inner journey over this past 20 years are relevant, applicable, and helpful to others. And when are people ready to hear those messages? Because sometimes what I think I've seen as a teacher, as a spiritual teacher, is that there's a time and place for everything. And so the pandemic and what's coming up for people is awakening interest and understanding of why do I live in fear, or why have I lived in fear? And so I'm fascinated by the fear journey because I've found that it's one of the most powerful tools for people to wake up and learn about themselves in a deeper way. You know, to not be so focused on the external rewards, but become more inwardly focused on the internal rewards, which, like we're talking about here, are so much more awesome. I don't know how to say it. Like, so much better than the external rewards, right? I mean, my journey was, I thought money was going to bring me the happiness that I sought in life. And it took running into several walls and, you know, meeting my demons and seeing that the life I thought I was supposed to live was actually just a house of cards ready to fall apart. And thankfully, gradually over time, started realizing that the rewards that I was seeking from the external world were actually, like you said, all within me all along. They were there and they can be captured all the time. And so I think I'm just very focused on how can I use what I've learned to help other people figure that out for themselves? And how can these times that we're in right now be something that help people to answer these bigger questions of life? Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, we certainly share the same mission of that. And what I think is so beautiful is we've come at it from two very different lives and very different experiences, and truly share that mission of trying to help others feel less stressed about not only money, but even more importantly, just make the most of the time that we have here. And, you know, it is that spiritual undercurrent within money as a form of energy that very few people are writing about and thinking about, but you and I are both fascinated by it. You know, I do feel a little bit like we're already on the Titanic, and this is something that, you know, I'm trying to learn as fast as I can. I do feel like I have quite a bit of catching up to do in terms of I haven't, you know, been doing this type of work for that long, but certainly I feel like we're in the late stage capitalism. Our minds can't keep up with all of the technology that now exists, climate change, you know, inequality, corruption. I think we're, you know, I think every writer or thinker or person thinks that their moment in history is the most challenging and the toughest. But we very, very honestly could be within our lifetime, it could be the end of all of this. And it's a meeting of the science narrative and the economic narrative and the personal narrative and the physical narrative. And I mean, you already see the cracks in this with increased depression and suicide and anxiety and disengagement at work and loneliness. I mean, the work that's being done in the loneliness space, and that as, you know, a more devastating killer in some cases than smoking and heart disease and obesity. I mean, loneliness is some of the work that's being done there is just fascinating. But for me, it feels like we're already on the Titanic sinking. And I think that not only is a condition for awakening, it's also a condition to live the fullest life. And no matter what you think, you know, what's the purpose of life, all of those, you know, whatever you believe, I think there is a level of joy around being able to feel fully alive and express and just breathe in this moment of just craziness. And it's wild time's not even the right word for it. It feels immense. It feels immense, the immensity of it. And I agree with you. I can feel people's fear. I can feel them hurting. I can feel the pain that is out there. I can, and for me, I'm just trying to do, like you, whatever small piece that I can to help. And that often starts with money. If you can get less stressed about money and have that under control, there are more time to spend with people you love, more time to go deeper into yourself, less stress around money, so you can explore those inner dimensions of your being and feel fully alive and just be whoever you want to be. But the
thing that I think both of us have done consistently, probably for much of our lives, and I think it has to do with why we're in the positions that we're in right now, is neither of us have been afraid to question the assumptions of the society that we live in. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think it's why we are able to look from the outside and back into what's going on. Like you mentioned the Titanic, it's like the reason that I just, as I'm thinking about the listeners listening to this conversation, I just felt like it's helpful to note that if you want more freedom in your life, one of the things that will give you more of that is to learn how to question assumptions, like every step of the way. Would you agree with that, Grant?
Yeah. Yeah. It's things are not always as they seem. And in fact, things are rarely as they seem. And, it's our own reality. It's often the things that we believe are simply things that we've gathered along the way and then become projections within our own reality. It's the thing, I remember thinking that certain people didn't like me, or something, worrying that, I was letting this person down, or worrying that I wasn't enough. And all of these things were simply projections that I'd inherited, or in a lot of cases, my mind just made them up out of thin air. And that's the thing. No one really knows, like the collective, you look at the pandemic, read all the news you want. We know very little, about what's going on or when it's going to end. We have so little control. We're getting all these mixed messages. Questioning the assumptions. And I just keep going back to openness, and it's so hard. That's where I'm getting stuck, Leisa, around how do you support creating those conditions of openness. And maybe it is a dialogue, but I think that the biggest thing that most books or critiques of culture get wrong is they simply point to a problem. They use some data to explain why it's wrong or why the conditions are happening, and then they tell you to make a change or that you should change. And we're at a moment now where we're so information fatigued. We don't trust anyone. The last thing that any of us want is to be talked at. I don't want to be talked at. I want to sit in silence with someone, and I want to sit in silence collectively with others and feel. I want to reorient the conversation around openness and vulnerability. And that's why on this podcast and everything, I'm getting better at it. I just try to share where I'm at. I'm just trying to share where I'm at 35 years old in upstate New York in late April in 2020. I mean, this is just, and I think the more that we can give that way collectively, the more supported and heard and felt and understood and loved others will feel. And that in and of itself, could be those conditions. And the last thing I'll say is, you mentioned that you led a silent retreat yesterday. I actually went on my first silent retreat right before this happened. First time I'd ever been to one. It was only 3 days. I went with one of my dear friends that I've had since I was 5 years old. And I was immensely touched by how close I felt to the other 40 people in that room over 3 days. And I hadn't said a word to them. They hadn't said a word to me. It was simply our collective energy, our experience, all of us going deep and living this life and breathing, that was the most profound takeaway for me of the whole thing. And I mean, that's it. How do you best support the conditions for waking up or self-love? Or, it all gets reduced to language, which inherently is a sign trying to explain something that is deeper and more expansive and more ethereal than a word or a sentence can even describe. And so it's like we're looking for words when we're at a loss for words, but still looking for words because I think both of us are just crying out to try to share and communicate that, hey, we found a different path, or we're on a different path than most people are on. And there's a lot of fruit and a lot of life over here.
Yeah. And the fact that getting comfortable with it not being comfortable, like being okay with the silence, being okay with not having answers. Like we've been raised in a culture that is all about, you ask a question and then you get the answer and then you start it again and again. And a lot of this journey, and I think the experience of the pandemic, what it's showing us is one of our potential skills that needs to be developed is feeling very comfortable in the uncomfortableness of the situation. That is actually that's a sign of strength, not weakness.
Yeah, that's where life is. That's the real deal. Like when you're feeling that way, you're and you recognize it and you can get more comfortable with it. That's when you know you're in the right place. So we should spend, it sounds like, less time running away from those things that make us feel uncomfortable and more time sitting and moving through them.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny. And I do feel like those roads do take us back to money, because when we can have some stability in our financial situation, even if that means we're living off of savings during a pandemic, like whatever it is, once we find some kind of anchor that allows us to get some space, we don't have to have all the answers, right? So like, I love money from the perspective that it can give us some basics, so that we do have more freedom to focus on the things that are going to bring us great joy. And I feel like this past 10 years, what I've witnessed in the economy, where it was just go, 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 more, there was so much focus on the external that people didn't pay as much attention to the internal, what was happening to us inside. But this is causing us to say, wait a minute, what if I didn't focus on more money for a little while? Like, what about that? What if I just focused on like the status quo or making it work, so that I could give myself more time to answer life's much bigger questions, which, you've presented several times in this conversation. Does that?
Yeah, resonate? I love that. I love that. And I want to bring this back around, and I want to ask you this question. I always thought that what I really, really wanted was freedom, and freedom with the simple definition of being able to wake up and do whatever I wanted with my day. And then once I got it, I had true financial freedom. I was so scared. I didn't know what to do with myself. I woke up, and when you go from not being able to do what you want to being able to do what you want all the time. I mean, you hear this with recent retirees as well. There's a level of you kind of got to look yourself in the mirror, maybe for the first time, or, it's one of those things where I hear all the time, I want financial freedom. I want freedom. I want to be able to do what I want. And then when I start asking those questions, often whoever I'm talking to, they already have that freedom. Mm-hmm. They're just putting it in the wrong wrapper, and they're putting it in that money wrapper. They're like, oh, if only I have $2 million, then I'll be free. I'll be able to do what I want. When in reality, in a lot of cases, they can already do what they want, or maybe they can only do what they want for 4 hours a day instead of 24 hours a day, but there's already so much there. And, my last question is, what does financial freedom mean to you?
The first word that comes is joy. But I think, just like you're explaining, I have a different way of looking at all of it. So my husband and I built wealth for ourselves. I mean, fire didn't exist when we were doing that, like 15 years ago, when we reached that stage. But what I just realized now is that money can be created in ways that cause us to sacrifice our soul. And I want no part of that for the rest of my life. And that, like, not living that is one thing for me, because I did that for so long. But for now, it's like money and financial freedom, the question that you're asking, to me is about living in this joyful place, no matter what's happening in my life, even if that meant all the money went away.
I love that. Yeah, I think for me, it's evolved to, do I feel alive? How alive do I feel? Mm-hmm. I think happiness is too small of a goal. I think that, how alive do I feel? Like, is it? Yeah, that's to me, that's sort of what it becomes. And that means feeling crazy. That means feeling love intensely. That means, I keep going back to this orange idea because, I really love oranges and I've eaten them my whole life, but just in the past year, they've tasted so rich. And that took time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you mentioned love. I mean, I feel like unconditional love is the thing that I've been living in and developing, especially over the past, I'd say, 5 years. And I feel like that's where the book was coming from, is this place of unconditional love for myself and for others. And that creates the feeling of joy in my life. And so if I can each and every day be noticing that I can be in this place, which probably means different things to different people. For me, it's freedom from judgment of myself and others. That's like, what's funny is financial freedom, 15 years ago, had that not happened for me, I don't know that I would be here today. So money was actually the enabler of my own personal awakening. It allowed me to have the time and the freedom to focus on the things that I teach now. I don't know if I would have been brave enough to have focused on this if I hadn't had that financial stability.
I agree. I'm right there with you, 100%. I think it creates the conditions for awakening and loving fully, and being the fullest expression of your being for the time that we're here. And everyone deserves that. Everyone deserves a life that they love, and it's too short to be stressed about money when money is complicated, but there are other paths. And so, Leisa, I've really enjoyed spending this time with you and digging deep here. And I feel very full and very grateful for you and the work that you're doing and this conversation. And I'm even more excited for the journey ahead and what's going to happen once your book is released, the Mindful Millionaire, and we'll have you back on the show. And I'm very grateful to be traveling this life journey with you.
Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for listening. I'm so excited that we get to share this with everybody.
Everyone, no matter where you're at, let's, we're thinking about you. We're here with you and hope you have a good day, and wishing you much peace and reflection. And we'll add love to that, love on your journey. So hope you all have a good day, and I'll see you soon.